Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Imagine you're undergoing brain surgery, right? Like a really delicate procedure to help with tremors you've been having.
Okay.
And the surgeons, they have this incredibly clear, real-time view of the exact brain activity.
Mm.
You know, the one causing those tremors.
Wow.
It's like they have this high-definition map guiding them every step of the way.
That sounds pretty incredible.
It kind of is. It's not science fiction, though.
Really?
Yeah. We're going to be diving into a new technique, a cutting-edge technique that could make this a reality for people with movement disorders like the ones we're talking about.
Okay, so we're talking about deep brain stimulation today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Today we're exploring this amazing research coming out of Mayo Clinic.
Oh, cool.
You know, you sent over that health news article.
Yeah.
And that really in-depth scientific paper from the Journal of Neurophysiology.
Mm-hmm.
And they both highlight this new way to monitor what's happening in the brain during DBS.
Right.
Deep brain stimulation,
Hmm.
which is often used to treat things like Parkinson's disease tremors,
Yeah.
essential tremors.
Yeah, a whole range of movement disorders.
So our goal today is pretty straightforward. We're going to unpack this new method of monitoring brain waves during deep brain stimulation.
Okay.
We'll look at what it involves, how it actually works, why it's such a potential game changer, and where this technology might be headed, all based on those sources you sent.
Awesome, I'm ready.
So let's start with the basics. When doctors perform deep brain stimulation surgery today, what kind of brain activity monitoring are they using?
So currently during deep brain stimulation surgery, the monitoring of brain waves is really critical for guiding the placement of those electrodes. But typically this involves looking at a fairly narrow range of electrical frequencies coming from the brain.
Okay.
It's kind of like, if you imagine an orchestra,
Yeah.
you're only listening to one instrument.
Oh, I see.
You get some information, right?
Yeah.
You get a general idea of the melody, but you're missing the richness of the entire musical piece.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So how does this new method from the Mayo Clinic researchers, how does that differ? How are they changing the way they're listening to the brain?
So what's really interesting here is that these researchers, that they used much more sensitive equipment,
Okay.
the kind you typically find in a dedicated research lab, and they coupled that with these custom-designed computer programs.
Oh, wow.
And this allowed them to record a much broader spectrum of the electrical frequencies that are produced by brain cells.
Okay.
And they refer to this as broadband activity.
Broadband activity. So it's like instead of listening to just one instrument, now they're trying to capture the whole orchestra playing at once.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so what does this broadband signal tell us about what's happening in the brain? What are they actually seeing or hearing in this case?
Well, this broadband activity reflects the combined electrical activity across all those different frequencies. It's an indication of all the brain cells firing within a specific region.
So it's a more holistic picture.
Exactly. Instead of just seeing peaks and valleys in a single frequency, they're getting this much richer understanding of the overall activity.
And what was the most significant insight they gained by looking at this wider range of brain activity?
The big discovery was that this broadband activity increased when patients moved their hands.
Oh, interesting.
And importantly, it was far more accurate in pinpointing the location of this activity compared to those standard, the more limited frequency signals that are typically used.
It is a sharper image.
Exactly. It's like going from a blurry picture to high definition.
Wow. So this new method offers a much more precise way for surgeons to see the brain in action during these procedures.
Absolutely. It's a game changer for precision.
So walk us through the study itself. How did they actually carry out this research?
Okay, so they studied 15 individuals who were undergoing awake deep brain stimulation surgery to treat tremors. And during the surgery, they recorded electrical activity from brain cells in a very specific area called the motor thalamus. Now, this motor thalamus is really important because it's a key control center for movement.
Okay.
And it's a common target for deep brain stimulation in people with movement disorders.
So it's a very strategic location.
Exactly.
And what were the participants doing while they were having this brain activity recorded?
So while the researchers were recording, the participants were asked to repeatedly open and close their dominant hand.
Okay.
And this was done at different recording sites as they were advancing the deep brain stimulation electrode.
So they weren't just looking at the general activity of the thalamus. They were looking at how it changed at very specific points.
Right. They were essentially creating a very detailed map. So they made these recordings in sequence
Okay.
as the electrode was advanced.
I see.
Different locations equally spaced.
Okay.
And this allowed them to see the activity at a much finer scale.
So they're getting a much more granular view.
Precisely. And then they analyzed changes in 2 different types of brain signals.
Okay, what were those?
Low-frequency oscillations, which are electrical signals that occur at less than 30 hertz.
Hertz.
You can think of hertz as the beats per second of these electrical signals.
Okay, so slower beats.
Right, and the second type was this broadband power,
Okay.
specifically in the range of 65 to 115 hertz.
So much faster beats.
Yes, much faster.
Okay, and what did they find when they looked at these different frequencies while the participants were moving their hands?
So as expected, they found that those slower, low-frequency oscillations, they decrease during movement.
Okay, so less of the slow waves when there's movement.
Right, and this is consistent with previous research. You see those slower oscillations often reflect more broad, synchronized activity across the brain,
Okay.
while this faster broadband power that they looked at, that seems to be more tightly linked to the firing of individual brain cells.
Individual neurons.
Or small groups of neurons that are very specifically involved in the movement itself.
So it's a more direct signal?
Right, more precise. And the really interesting finding was this localized increase in the broadband power.
No.
This increase was seen most often at the lower recording sites
Right.
within the ventral thalamus, and it occurred at the same time as the hand movements in most of the participants.
You said most.
Yeah.
So not all of them showed this increase in broadband activity during movement. Were there any thoughts on why it wasn't consistent across everyone?
You know, that's a really great question, and it is a crucial point.
Yeah.
This movement-related increase in broadband power, it wasn't seen in every single one of the 15 participants. And that suggests that there could be individual differences in how this signal is either generated or detected.
So there's more to uncover there.
Definitely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the study also involved imagined movement. Can you tell us a bit more about that part?
Yeah, so in one participant, they also had them perform imagined hand movements.
Okay, so just thinking about moving.
Exactly. And during this imagined movement, they saw a decrease in those low-frequency oscillations.
Similar to what happened with the real movement,
Interesting.
but they didn't see any big changes in the broadband activity.
So the broadband signal seems to be specifically tied to actual physical movement rather than just the thought of moving.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
That's fascinating. It really highlights how specific this signal might be.
It does.
So we've got this new way of looking at brain activity during deep brain stimulation surgery. Why is this such a big deal? Why should our listeners be excited about this?
Well, if you think about the broader implications, this higher resolution and more precise information that we get from broadband monitoring could be hugely beneficial for neurosurgeons during these procedures.
Okay, how's
It gives them a much clearer, real-time picture of exactly where the movement-related activity is happening in the brain, allowing them to refine the placement of the electrode and fine-tune those stimulation settings.
More precise targeting, and how could that translate into benefits for the patients undergoing this procedure? Well, the hope is that this level of precision will lead to better symptom relief.
So less tremor.
Right. And potentially fewer side effects.
Okay, that's huge.
Which can sometimes happen with deep brain stimulation.
So for someone listening who might be considering deep brain stimulation, this could mean even better tremor control.
Hopefully.
And fewer of those unwanted side effects.
Potentially, yeah.
Now, beyond just the surgical benefits, does this research tell us anything new about how the brain actually works?
Oh, absolutely. This study really gives us a deeper understanding of how the thalamus, and specifically the motor thalamus, processes movement. The fact that they could detect this broadband signal in this deep brain region, previously this was mainly seen on the surface of the brain.
Oh, wow.
So this is a big step forward.
So we're peering deeper into the brain.
Exactly. And it suggests that using this signal, we might be able to create even more accurate functional maps of the brain during surgery, really pinpointing those specific areas responsible for different aspects of movement.
So it's like a high-resolution map of the brain.
Yeah, like a GPS for surgeons.
So this could lead to even more refined surgical techniques in the future.
Absolutely.
And what about beyond surgery? What are the long-term implications of this research?
Well, you know, this research could pave the way for completely new and more advanced brain stimulation therapies.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about closed-loop, deep brain stimulation systems.
Okay.
Instead of constant stimulation, imagine a system that responds intelligently to your brain activity.
Oh, wow.
Delivering therapy only when it's needed.
That's pretty incredible.
It is. That's the potential game changer that this research hints at.
Closed loop. So how would that be different from current deep brain stimulation?
So with the current deep brain stimulation, it's often continuous electrical stimulation,
Mm-hmm.
but a closed loop system would be much smarter.
Okay.
It could use some kind of biological marker, like this broadband signal, to detect when stimulation is actually needed. So only when you're actively trying to move and experiencing a tremor.
So it's demand driven.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it would automatically adjust the stimulation or even turn it on and off.
Wow. So this could potentially lead to fewer side effects and just a more efficient and personalized therapy.
Precisely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So this broadband signal really could be the key to a much smarter deep brain stimulation system.
It could be. It's really promising.
This is all incredibly exciting. But you did mention some limitations earlier.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges or maybe unanswered questions that still remain about this research?
Right. So as we talked about the movement-related increase in that broadband power,
Yeah.
it wasn't observed in all 15 participants.
Right?
And that suggests, as we mentioned, that there might be individual differences in how this signal is generated or detected.
Yeah, so more research is needed there.
Definitely.
And are there any concerns about whether these signals are truly brain activity or if they could be artifacts from the operating room environment?
That's a good point. And it's something the researchers considered carefully.
Okay.
So the frequency range they looked at for that broadband activity.
65 to 115 hertz.
Yeah, right. That's within a range that could potentially be susceptible to electrical noise that you find in an operating room.
Oh, I see, because there's a lot of equipment in there.
Exactly. And all that equipment can generate electrical signals that could interfere with the recording of these really subtle brain signals.
So how did they address that?
Well, they were very careful with their recording techniques.
Okay.
Trying to minimize that noise, but it is something to keep in mind.
So it's a factor to consider.
Yeah.
Were there any other limitations in the study design itself?
Yeah, the fact that the recordings were done sequentially at different locations.
Right as the electrode was being moved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That might have introduced some variability because, the patient's state, their alertness, even slight changes in their tremor could have fluctuated between those recording points.
So there's a potential for slight variations.
Right.
So what are the next steps for the research team? How are they going to build on these findings and address those limitations?
Well, they have some exciting plans.
Okay.
They're going to conduct studies where they record brain activity simultaneously from multiple locations in the thalamus.
Okay.
So they're going to get a more comprehensive real-time view.
So multiple viewpoints at once.
Exactly. And they also want to study how this broadband signal changes with different types of movements,
Okay.
not just hand movements.
So expanding beyond just the hands.
Yeah, maybe foot movements or tongue movements.
Interesting. So a broader range of motor activities.
Right. And finally, they're looking into using even more advanced recording equipment.
Even more sensitive.
Yeah, to further reduce that noise and capture these signals even more clearly.
That's great. It's encouraging that they're taking these steps. Now let's hear from the researchers themselves. What did the lead neurologist and some of the other key contributors have to say about their findings?
So the lead author on the study, Brian Klassen.
He's a neurologist, right?
Yes. He emphasized that their approach to measuring brain activity was really unique because it focused on this broadband signal.
Okay.
He highlighted their main finding that this broadband activity increased with movement.
Yeah.
And that it was much more localized than the changes they observed in the standard signals they usually look at.
So really zeroing in on the source of the activity.
Exactly.
What insights did the other researchers share?
So Matthew Baker, who's a postdoctoral fellow in neurosurgery, he co-authored the study.
Okay.
He emphasized how this research really adds to our fundamental understanding of how the thalamus processes movement.
So it's not just about the technology, but it's also expanding our knowledge.
Right. And he also pointed out that this new way of looking at brain activity could lead to more precise functional mapping of the brain during surgery.
So better maps, better outcomes.
Exactly.
And what about the perspective of the senior author, the neurosurgeon on the team?
So Dr. Kai Miller, the senior neurosurgeon, he really underscored the importance of the collaboration between the neurology and neurosurgery departments at Mayo Clinic.
It was a joint effort.
It was, and he believes it was essential for this research to be successful.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
It really does in this case. And he also talked about how these findings could contribute to the development of those next-generation brain stimulation therapies.
Those closed-loop systems we were talking about.
Exactly. That's where they see this research leading.
It's amazing to see how this could transform treatment. Did the researchers highlight any specific areas for future research besides those improvements to this study methods?
Yeah, so Dr. Baker, he specifically mentioned that they want to look more closely at how the broadband signal changes with different types of movements.
So really digging into the nuances.
Yes. And he also mentioned that exciting possibility of using this signal to control new types of stimulation devices.
Okay.
The ones that would only deliver therapy when the patient needs it.
So minimizing those side effects. And what would you say is the overall takeaway message from the researchers? What's a big picture significance of this work?
They really believe that these findings could have a huge impact.
Okay.
In a number of areas. First, a deeper understanding of what causes tremor.
Oh.
Second, more accurate functional mapping of the brain during surgery. And finally, refining deep brain stimulation and developing those closed-loop approaches.
For more effective and personalized treatments.
Exactly.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. It's clear that this research offers a really compelling new way of looking at how we can monitor and improve deep brain stimulation for people with movement disorders.
It is.
And while it's still early days, the potential for more precise, personalized, and responsive treatments is huge.
It's incredibly exciting.
It really highlights how examining brain activity through a different lens can reveal these amazing new insights.
And possibilities.
And possibilities.
Yeah.
So on that note, here's a final thought for you to consider. How might this more detailed understanding of brain activity change not only the treatment of movement disorders, but other neurological conditions as well?
That's a great question.
What other aspects of brain function could we understand better by using this broadband perspective? It's something to ponder. We encourage you to learn more about deep brain stimulation and the research happening in closed-loop neurostimulation.
It's a rapidly evolving field.
It is. There's so much happening. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
It's been a great conversation.
It has.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.